Good morning, Jack. We're very appreciative of your being willing to talk to us about the history of behavior analysis and about your personal experience in the history of behavior analysis. And we'd like to know what events in your history led you to become a behavior analyst.
Well, I came into the field through a lot of wanderings, as one might say. I started out in physics and mathematics, and also got a degree in psychology from Georgia Tech. And I went to the University of North Carolina as a clinician. In fact, I had some clinical experience at the VA hospital in Augusta, Georgia, where, by the way, we did actually a behavior modification study. It was my first publication in the Journal of Clinical Psychology. Anyway, when I got to Chapel Hill, I took an experimental course from Dick King, and we went over to the laboratory one of those first days, and I saw for the first time a cumulative record. And I said to myself, wow, that looks like something out of the physics lab. They were so beautiful in their patterning and the consistency of those patterns that I thought this might be something to explore. But I remained a clinical psychology student for a whole year. I became quite disillusioned, especially with projective techniques and other sorts of things that clinicians are supposed to learn about. And I decided to switch into experimental after the first year, with the good graces of the clinical people, I must say. And I began working in the Department of Psychiatry and Biochemistry in the medical school in Chapel Hill with a physician named Mario Reyes, who was actually sort of a jack of all trades. He was a surgeon, an internist, and as well as a psychiatrist, and he was very interested in certain kinds of drug effects. So I started working with him, and beginning in the area of behavioral pharmacology. But a major factor was the return to the department of Mark Waller, who had been up in Jackson Laboratories in Maine, but also had worked in the pharmacology lab at Harvard Medical School with Peter Dews, Bill Morse, and Roger Kelleher. And so when he returned, I ultimately became his assistant. And my task, along with some other folks, was to essentially build a laboratory. He had a fairly large grant, and so we built all the equipment. We put together relays and all the other attendant devices. And and then I began to do experiments in that domain with schedules and a variety of other kinds of related areas. By the way, we didn't know the term behavior analysis then. I'm not sure we even identified ourselves with any particular group. But the experiments were so exciting, and we also had ideal circumstances. We had basically an entire building to ourselves, and so there were several other graduate students all working in one place. And we really, it was quite a collaborative process, and we were each excited by others' experiments. And you could set up and run 4 or 5 experiments easily in that laboratory. So I came into the field in this way, which is not so I'm going to become a behavior analyst, but rather interested in certain kinds of problems, and particularly in schedules and reinforcement. So,
what would you consider the most important contribution to behavior analysis that you've made?
Well, I'm not sure what that might be. That's for other people to judge. But it appears that one of the aspects of my work that's somewhat unique is relating the field of behavior analysis and behaviorism, radical behaviorism primarily, to other sciences, other natural sciences, because of my background in the natural sciences, this seemed like a natural. And I still find that quite an interesting topic to try to see how behavior analysis and certain attendant philosophical positions relate to other fields, for example, physics, biology, and so on. So that's been mostly what I've done. Early work in schedules of reinforcement, I think, I found quite exciting and had some recognition for work, for example, in things like second order schedules and some work in behavioral pharmacology. But overall, I think if I had to define my career, it was sort of searching for those relationships between natural sciences.
Of your papers that you've published, which one do you like the best?
The one I actually liked the best was a paper I published in the early 70s called Sequence Schedules. And it was a study I did when I was a research fellow in pharmacology at Harvard Medical School. And it was apparently one of the first papers that looked at dynamical systems approach to schedule performance, even though we didn't use those words. And sometimes I go back and I look at that paper, and to me, it's my favorite experiment, and it's my favorite paper. That's a long, long time ago, which I don't know what that means exactly, but sometimes you do things that sort of strike you, and they stay with you for a very long period of time. I don't know how many other people ever read that paper. There was some follow-on work by people like Malagodi with it, but it's one of those things that probably, was gathering dust, so to speak, in the archives.
How do you think that behavior analysis has changed over the years of your career?
Well, it's changed radically in many ways. For one thing, we're certainly training far few people in the basic sciences of behavior analysis than we did when I came out. There were many, and continued to be a very, very active community, perhaps until somewhere in the late 80s. The 70s were probably the heyday. That shift from basic science into application is also a major aspect of changes in the field. In days even before I got into the field, there was no distinction between basic and applied behavior analysis. People like Sidman and others did applied work and basic work, and essentially there wasn't any distinction. That's a point of view, I think, that been difficult to maintain, because the applied community has become quite separate from the basic community, unfortunately. So we have two cultures that have evolved. This is manifested in many ways. One way it's manifested the distinction between the Journal of the Experimental Analysis of Behavior and the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. Having served on editorial boards and been involved in both those journals, it's very easy to see that, in fact, there are two different cultures there. Of course, there's also the rise of practice issues, which didn't even exist before. And these issues are coming to claim a lot of attention, especially in apparent competition with basic science. The field is, like any other field that grows over time, it obviously is going to change and become sort of institutionalized in certain ways. When at first, as I pointed out earlier, I never even thought about a name of the field. We did certain kinds of things, and that's what we like to do. And only later did it become kind of an institution. Of course, organizations like ABBA established those institutions, but those institutions change over time as well.
Is there anything in your career that you would do differently if you had to do it over again?
Yeah, publish
Hindsight?
more.
Publish more.
Yeah.
Do experimentally or?
Yes. I have a number of experiments that I never published, and I should have done so. I have a book or two I should have written, and although I am planning to write a book about behavior analysis as a natural science, the question is, do you get these things done?
Yes. What areas of the field would you like to see more work in?
Well, I think the field of basic behavior analysis is actually under considerable threat. There are not nearly as many of us folks around, and the places to produce them seem to be dwindling. And so that's a difficult situation for the entire field. But when one thinks about what the future of this may be, it may be that behavior analysis, at least as a basic science, will become, in a certain sense, absorbed into other domains. Already, people in pharmacology and neurobiology and so on and so have been using methods of behavior analysis for many, many years. And we can certainly contribute to those areas. They also can contribute to us as well. But another area which a lot of people in the field don't know much about, and I can't claim to know that much about either, which is highly relevant, I think, and which is a very a major growing area, is in robotics. In the course of talking to people at Georgia Tech, I've contacted people who were work in this field, and we have a lot to talk about. And I've had students in my class who are from computer science who work in robotics, and they find this business about consequence-driven systems, as they call them, very, very important, and I think we can make great contributions there. I think we can also learn a lot from them. So going into these other domains may be one of those areas, one of those ways in which the field can grow. But as an entity, I think basic behavior analysis is under considerable threat, and we have lots of evidence for this. And the folks in the applied and the practice areas need to be aware of this problem, because who's going to train these people in the basic sciences? And I cannot imagine these fields believing they can get along without it.
Well, you've touched on this, but perhaps you can amplify a little bit. How do you project or predict the future of behavior analysis? Or maybe what you'd like to see happen and what you think might happen?
Well, in addition to what I said about these other areas, to tell you the truth, I'm not very sanguine about the continuation of the field as a single entity. Some of the dispersal of the field has actually been very good. You know, the Journal of Experimental Analysis of Behavior was founded in 1958 by people like Skinner and others who felt that the experimental work they were doing was not being adequately treated in the issue of publication, because it didn't involve large groups of subjects and sort of between group designs and a variety of other features. And so the journal dealing with individual behavior was just not around, and so they founded it. Well, nowadays, you can look at a variety of experimental psychology journals, and the work that we do and work like it appear routinely. So we have had that kind of influence, and people realize that what we've done makes sense and is a major contribution. So we have dispersed in that way. But as to the future of the field, I find that I'm not terribly hopeful. I would hope that there might be some things that we could do, and after all, we do have these large behavioral organizations that could exert some influence on development of basic behavior analysis, especially in terms of setting up more and more programs to produce basic science people. But in the absence of that, it's not clear what the future is. And I think people in the field, whatever stripe they happen to be, need to be very concerned about this. We can be misled by the enormous number of people in the practice in applied areas that looks like the field is really doing terrific. The Association of Behavior Analysis meetings with 5,000 attendees and so on and so forth makes the field look like it's really growing and so on. But there's this underlying problem. Not all of it comes from within the behavior and analytic field or from opinions of people on the outside. A lot of the difficulties have arisen because, for example, of the cost of animal laboratories. And that affects not just behavior analysis, but a whole range of areas in neurobiology and in other areas of experimental psychology. So we're not the only ones suffering in this regard. So we certainly do need to put an enormous amount of effort in trying to figure out ways so that the field at least doesn't disappear, as it might well. And then I don't know what will happen in the applied or practice areas. It will mean that they become sort of guilds that do not depend heavily on basic science. This is possible, I think, because applied behavior analysis, as I see it, is a kind of engineering. And it has its own methods and its own variety of other ways of doing things, like an engineering, and might be able to persist forever in that way. But good engineering always is founded on basic science. And so, as I said, I'm not very hopeful.
Well, what message would you like to send to future students?
Well, I guess it depends on what they were students of. But I've been sort of on a soapbox for years about training in behavior analysis at the undergraduate level and the graduate level, that many people in this field don't know any science and they don't know any mathematics. Believing that behavior analysis is a natural science, and if you're in any other natural science, you have a grounding in other natural sciences. You know, if you're a biology major at Georgia Tech, for example, you have to take physics and chemistry and a variety of other kinds of fair amount of mathematics. This is just part of training, scientific training. Well, it should also be the same way in behavior analysis. And I find that a lot of students in these fields know nothing about anything else but behavior analysis. That also applies to learning about other areas in psychology. Areas like cognitive neuroscience and areas like individual differences and so on and so forth. Sometimes we treat these as caricatures, but they do have contributions to make, and we can't have any real influence unless we know what they're about. So I think education of people in this field can sometimes be much too provincial, and it should not be. So you should go after those areas, and you should encourage curriculum development that reflects the fact that you're supposed to be a scientist.
Thank you very much.